I want to hear the secrets that only the employees know.
I used to work at a cemetery for about 4 to 5 years. Where the cemetery sells a plot, places your family into a casket, and they always tell you that they'll be fine. Casket is built to preserve their body, keep rodents and water from going in. Times where we've done interments, which is we take the bodies out of the casket. And sad to say, your family member is floating in water most of the time and have to pump that water out. Such a horrific smell. Even though they were placed in a $5,000 to $10,000, even $20,000 casket. Sometimes people go to the extreme and put their family member in a vault. Mother Nature still gets her way, and they're floating in water right now. Whenever it does happen, ask the family to stay back, and they never see what really happened. They only get to see our expression of us gagging. Like, damn, what if they weren't dead? If they're dead now, they motherfuckers drown. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. More secrets to come. Cemetery Secrets, Part 2. Now, when it rains, and I'm not talking your average daily rain. I'm talking about when it rains really hard and it causes flooding. Your family members' graves will sink in. That exposes their concrete liner that they're in. Mind you, these concrete liners weigh up to 2,000 to 2,500 pounds. With so much flooding, that water shifts that 2,000-pound lid, exposing the casket. Sometimes that water pushes open the casket lid. And sad to say, we see bodies. With the supervisor being notified by that, all burial services for that day, possibly that week, are on hold. And the entire cemetery is shut down. You cannot enter for no reason whatsoever. Not even if you're the president of the United States, you cannot enter. We're not talking just one grave, we're talking a lot. We have to rebury everyone that was flooded out. Part 3 coming up. Cemetery Secrets, Part 3. And I hope you brought your flashlight, because this is a dark secret. The cemetery I was working at is old, much like the rest of them. One occasion when I was operating the machine and I had to dig the hole for the body, foremans that were there watching me dig, spotting me, told me to stop, get out, turn off the machine. I was confused. I got out the machine, went over to the hole to see what was wrong. Man, this one, I feel like I shouldn't be sharing this one. We were digging up old bones. It called for an automatic shutdown of the cemetery. Everyone had to leave. Didn't matter if you were there visiting mom or grandma or grandpa, you had to leave. Supervisor was called, came out there. Mind you, this spot had no headstone. On the paperwork, it was showing the space was available. Somewhere down the line, back in the day, somebody didn't do the paperwork. I ran out of time, but a part 4 will be up. Cemetery Secrets, a continuation of Part 3. After us discovering the bones, the cemetery did their own investigation. No one was supposed to be there. There were no records or no files. Nothing to indicate or fall back on that somebody was there. And that led to us contacting the big supervisor, the guy that ran the show. We had a quick meeting, and the only thing that we can fall back on was that somebody back in the day did not do the paperwork, or paperwork was done, but paperwork was lost. So we continued with the service. What also took place in that meeting was to stop digging. A normal casket is buried 80 inches. I believe we were about 70 inches deep, and we were ordered to bury those bones and to continue with the burial service that was scheduled for that day. We buried somebody there. Nobody but us cemetery workers know that that recently deceased individual was buried on top of somebody else. We kept our mouth shut and went on about our day. That wasn't the only occasion when that happened. You want more secrets? Hit up the comment. This is part 1 for a scary cemetery encounter. I've been working at this certain cemetery for a while now, and I don't recall when these incidents started happening. We had to be clocked in and ready to work at 7 o'clock. I'd get to work early around 6:30. And every morning, there was an old lady walking around. First couple of times I seen her, I didn't pay it any attention. I mean, the cemetery was open, the security guards opened the gates, so I mean, it was no big deal. I started noticing her a lot more. She was just walking. She wasn't really looking at anyone's headstone, visiting anybody. She always had flowers in her hand. One day I got to work, clocked in, and I drove past her. I waved at her and said hi and asked if there was anything that she needed help with or finding somebody. Froze like I stopped her in her tracks. And I said, "Hello, miss? Is everything all right?" And she slowly turned around and looked at me. And she said, "Are you lost?" I was like, "What?" She grinned at me, turned away, and continued walking. I just shrugged it off as her being a rude old lady. Part 2 coming up, and it gets much worse. So after encountering that old lady, I drove off and didn't think about it. Went on about my day and continued working. Not only was I noticing her every morning, but she was there every time we left. I mean, the cemetery workers were gone, but the cemetery was still open, so it was nothing to worry about because technically she's allowed to be there if she wanted to. I never spoke to her ever again. I always waved. She'd look at me and look away and never said anything. But one day, we were having a burial service, and I was out there with one of the ladies that worked at the cemetery that sold the plot. The hole was dug, and we were standing there waiting for the service, and we were just chit-chatting and having a regular conversation about work. And she asked me, have you seen anything crazy yet? And I said, what do you mean? She said, have you felt weird working here? Has anything weird happened to you? I said, no, nothing really weird has happened to me, but I did have a weird conversation with an old lady. She was like, huh? And I told her about the first encounter I had with the old lady and how she was here when I left from work. And the look on her face, man. She was like, are you serious? I'm like, yeah. She said, was she wearing all black? Part 3 is coming up. Scary Cemetery Encounter Part 3. So she asked me, was she wearing all black? And I said, yeah, she was. Mouth just dropped, man, and she froze and just stared at me for a couple of seconds. And her voice, it just seemed like she got sad. And she started praying in Spanish and told me that everything was going to be okay. I didn't think anything of it. I just thought it was just a random rude encounter with an old lady. Now she's got me freaking out. Now she's got me worried, The lady I was speaking to told me she had encounters with that old lady as well. She said one day she had enough, she saw her walking and she'd followed her in her car at a safe distance and watched her just to see what she was doing, who she was, where she was going. She said all of a sudden, the old lady walked behind a big tree and never came around the other side of it, and she disappeared. Now I was starting to get scared, like, what? She said, you were talking to a spirit, son. And that had me messed up the whole day, man. Lady also said that she did research and there was no records or files of that lady being buried anywhere in that cemetery. Once she went behind that tree, she knew what she was. If you want a part 4, let me know. Scary Cemetery Encounter Part 4. After being told on what I encountered was a ghost, still had a hard time believing it. Until the lady that I was speaking with mentioned it to the other co-worker. They were there to confirm it, that what I encountered was a ghost. I just never stopped seeing her after that. One crazy night, it got bad. It was a normal day, went to work, clocked out, went home, right? Around 6 or 7 o'clock, the cemetery is closed and locked up by the security guards. Maybe a little later. Supervisor was on vacation, so they left one of the foremen in charge. He received a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning from the security guard, telling him that he needs to come down there right now and bring somebody with him. That foreman called everybody that worked with us. Nobody answered but me. He told me to come pick him up from his house and take him over there to the cemetery that somebody was breaking in. I went over, picked him up, met up at the cemetery gate, and we met the security guard there. Excuse my language, but he said, I don't know who the fuck is out there, but something ain't right. Mind you, this security guard was 6'5", and he had a big-ass gun on his side. Part 5 coming up. Scary Cemetery Encounter, this is Part 5. I said earlier, the security guard was about 6'5", and he had a big-ass gun on his side. When we got there, the alarms were going off, and we went to go check. Drove around the front office, it was clear. We drove around and inspected the morgue, clear. Drove all around, up and down the cemetery, didn't find anything until we got to a part of the cemetery called Resurrection. That's when we heard loud, horrific screaming. Mind you, being by the office, we were a good distance away from this area. The security guard slammed on the brakes, put the truck in park, and rolled down the windows, but he kept the engine running. The screaming got louder and louder, and I was scared, man, I'm not gonna lie. We all three got out with our flashlights and started walking up and down the cemetery until we came across somebody dressed in all black. I mean, this shit was pitch black. You couldn't see them, man. That's how dark they were. Foreman I was with was yelling at him, hey, you need to get out of here. We're going to call the cops. But whatever this black figure was doing was twitching and turning and moving and jumping around in all positions like they were being electrocuted. Security guard shouted, I'm advising you, you need to leave now. Part 6 coming up. Scary Cemetery Encounter Part 6. The warning whoever was there in a graveyard to leave. They wouldn't listen. They started screaming. I mean, I've never heard screaming like this before in my life. I had to take a guess on what the screaming sounded like. I think it would sound like somebody being killed. That's how intense it was. Mind you, the whole time this was going on, the security guard had his flashlight pointed and his hand gripped on his pistol. Assuming it was a woman, I could very well be wrong, but they had black hair and it was screaming at us. And the security guard warned them, don't come any closer. You need to leave. This black figure started moving, twitching around. This thing dropped on the ground and started growling. And from a distance, what I can see, that this thing was clawing like hardcore, scratching the ground. You see chunks of grass and dirt flying. Foreman had enough and he pulled out his phone and started calling the cops. He was making a call, the screaming continued. He was telling the operator they need assistance right now. They need someone to come to the cemetery. I ran out of time. Part 7 coming up. After an intense confrontation with this, it began to approach us, creeping and crawling all around the other headstones it was near. Security guard was yelling at the top of his lungs, "Stay back, don't move." It started moving closer to us, but wrapped itself around a big tree next to one of the headstones, peeking around the corners looking at us. It was disgusting, a disgusting feeling I got from this thing. It was making me feel sick now, telling you. Felt like hours, but the cops finally showed up. 2 cops pulled up and it didn't take long for them to realize what was going on. They started shouting, "You need to come out. Come out with your hands up." This thing didn't seem to be fazed by anything, just wrapping and swinging around each side of the tree, just like in a playful manner, and growling at the same time. One cop pulled out a taser. His partner followed him, with his hand on his pistol. Approached this thing behind a tree. This thing was screaming, growling, and the cop started screaming. Security guard pulled out his gun. He started approaching this thing behind the tree. Cop fired his taser. Part 8 coming up. Scary cemetery encounter. Now these 2 cops went behind the tree, one of them with his taser drawn and the other on his pistol. The one with the taser shot his taser at this thing. They both were screaming at this thing. All of a sudden the cops got quiet, and they were whispering and talking to each other. I couldn't pick up on what they were talking about. They looked at each other and their eyes were just like bulging out of their head. They backed away from the tree and they kept looking back at the tree, looking at us, looking back at the tree, looking at us. Security guard asked them what happened. Took him to the side and they walked to the police car. And the foreman were asking what's wrong and they just said, "Stay put." The cops got in the car and was talking on the radio, and I don't know who or what he was talking about. They talked for about 10-15 minutes. The cops drove off. The security guard said, "We need to get the hell out of here." Blocked up that part of the cemetery and we drove out and we asked them what the cops said, what's going on, what happened. They said it didn't hit nothing. Taser hooks latched onto the tree. Security guard said the cop told him. Cop told the security guard this black figure went inside the tree. Part 9 coming up. Scary cemetery encounter, part 9. The security guard told the foreman and I what happened. We didn't believe that shit. We couldn't comprehend it either. We saw something out there and we just thought it was all bullshit. The foreman laughed it off and he said, "Alright, I'll check it in the morning." Security guard was like, "How you gonna check that?" He said, "Don't worry, I'll check it in the morning." After we left, me and the foreman got in my car and I went to go take him home, and I said, "How are you gonna check that?" He said, "They don't know, but there's a camera there. The wide view of the cemetery, especially that spot by the tree." So I dropped him off and I went home and I didn't sleep that night. Next morning I received a phone call from the big supervisor. He said he needed me to come in. He said he knows I'm off, but he needs me to come in. He told me as soon as I come in, meet him in his office. Shit, I thought I was in trouble because anytime anyone goes to his office, something's wrong. As soon as I open that door, the security guard and the foreman are there waiting. Started discussing how this all played out. And all of a sudden, a knock on the supervisor door. He said, "Come in." It was those 2 cops that were there that night. Still in uniform. Ran out of time, part 10 coming up. Scary cemetery encounter, part. Knock was heard at the door. The supervisor said to come in, and it was those 2 cops. We discussed that whole situation on how everything played out. We went into a side room next to the supervisor's office, and it was all monitors and cameras. We sat and watched and replayed that whole video. Showed us like it did that night. Zoomed in and cleared the picture the best we can. And what we saw looked like a little man. Looked like he had nothing on. His hair was curly and black. He had a long, big nose. He had a long tail, and he had a stick. He sat there, freaked out. Police officers said they'd never encountered anything like this before. And they sat there with their arms folded and their hands over their mouth in shock, man. It was freaky. Like the vibe in that room, the energy was just crazy. I don't know what it was, but it was like a little demon or something. Same day, right in front of us, the supervisor stopped the tape, called a local tree cutting company to come out as soon as possible to cut that tree down, because he wanted no parts of that, especially if word got out. Part 11 coming up. Scary cemetery encounter, part 11. For some reasons my headphone isn't working. I said earlier, the best way that I can describe how this thing looked. It was little, had a tail, a long nose, black curly hair, and a stick. Just an ugly, nasty looking thing, man. The supervisor ordered a tree company to come by and cut the tree down. Sure enough, they came by that same day. We were there to help them and assist them with cutting that tree down. And I kid you not, we started up those chainsaws and started cutting that tree. The inside of this tree was black. The inside was burned. When we would cut it in half, smoke would come out. We were thinking it was the chainsaw, but we stopped cutting to watch the tree and it was smoking. I said the supervisor wanted no part of this. He didn't want to believe in this crap. I couldn't explain to you on what this demon looked like because I don't know anything about spirits, demons, or ghosts or whatever. He didn't want word to get out because there were people buried by that tree. Cut the tree down, hauled it off, we never saw it again. There was a negative energy by that area. I've ran out of time, but part 12 will be coming up right. Scary cemetery encounter part. After the tree was removed and hauled off, somehow word did get out. It wasn't from me, it must have been from another co-worker there. The word reached out to a holy man. He came by every day from what I saw from my work schedule. He was out there praying on his knees, had a glass bottle full of water, which I'm assuming is holy water. He was praying in Spanish, he was praying in Native American, and he was praying in English. He was tossing other things that looked like crushed incense or some kind of herbs. The strangest thing about this whole situation is that no matter what we did, that tree always grew back. We would cut it, we would go as far to even poisoning that tree stump. He even dug out the tree stump at one point. For some strange reason, a piece of that tree always grew back. Rest assured, that tree gets chopped down every time the landscapers come to cut the grass. If you would like more secrets or stories, hit me up in the comments, because there's much more to tell.